Hello everybody, in this video I would like to talk to you about how children acquire language. It seems like a very simple question, and sometimes even people give me a weird look when I ask this question. They're like, what do you mean? Like, of course, they just copy adults and that's how they acquire language. But in the history of humankind, when we think about it, some of the biggest discoveries were made by simply examining something that was already thought to be figured out, like for instance gravity, like some basic things that so mundane looking things may not be what they look like to be. Like before Newton, the gravity, wasn't really thought very well. It was just like, yeah, like for instance, Aristotle was saying, things seek their natural places. Like when you ignite a fire, fire goes up because some layers of the earth is made out of fire, so that's where it goes, where it belongs. The water goes down because water is originated from the earth, so it seeks its original place. So this explanation was very satisfactory for centuries until Isaac Newton looked at the same thing, which didn't really puzzle anybody else, but he started thinking about this very basic thing, and he said, there is between masses, there's something that attracts them. So, and that is, as we know today, is gravity. So even when Newton was coming up with this idea, oh, there's some invisible attraction between matter, he was kind of ridiculed, like saying that, this is not a scientific way of looking at it, looking at things. Invisible force, what do you mean, like invisible force? This is science. Science doesn't deal with invisible forces. We deal with concrete things. So when you look at something as natural as a child acquiring language, you may not even think twice, like sex. So this is such a basic, simple process. So what's to think about it? But when you examine it closely, you'll see that there is more to it. So let's go through, and like for instance, like when you first hear, let's say you are an alien and you came to this earth and you hear people are talking. All you will hear is probably just a blob of things, like it will sound like nothing to you except noise. And this is pretty much similar to babies' first interaction with sound. And so they have to do, what they have to do is they have to identify a word from a speech stream. Speech stream is like a continuous stream. It's not like, we don't usually pause between words. So if we did, that would be easier for the other person to realize when a word starts and ends. But when we talk, it's just usually, especially if it's your first language, you'll just flow. Your speech will just flow without any interruption. So it seems like an easy thing to identify a word from a speech stream, but it's really is a very hard task. And we will get to it. I'm gonna have you experience that it's not an easy task. And then that's the first step. The second step is to remember what the words sound like so that you can recognize it when you hear it again. So just because you identify a word, it doesn't end there. You have to remember the sound of it so you can remember it again when you hear it. And then the third part is to link the word, that sound, with an object or action or something else. So these three steps are within the word comprehension. So that means if you manage these three steps, you will be able to understand what the word means. But as you know, knowing a word or even knowing a sentence is not enough, or sentence is enough to say, I know this language. You have to not only comprehend the language, but also you have to produce the language. That means you have to speak it, or one way or another you have to express it. So which involves more steps than comprehension. That's the reason why if you take a foreign language course, your comprehension is way better than your speaking in that language. And that's true for all languages. If you're learning any language, you will know more than you will produce. You can speak, because word comprehension steps in order for you to produce the language, that means to speak, you will have to know more steps. You will have to achieve more steps to do it. These extra steps are to be able to repeat the sound of the word that you heard, and also to say the word in an appropriate context. Just because you can say the word, some random word in a language, if you don't use it in the appropriate right context, it doesn't really mean anything. Let's say you know what apple means in English. You can't just walk around and say apple to every question, like how are you, apple. You know what it means, but you're not using it in the appropriate context. So the speech stream is, when you look at the spectrogram, and you will see that the speech stream is just flowing. There's no breaking between. That's why, and you will see it on the screen, that it's hard to determine by just simply looking at the spectrogram to see where each word starts and ends and the next one starts. It's really hard to do it. Like the one you see on the screen right now, it says I owe you, but you can't really tell where I starts and ends, O and you. It's just one thing. It looks like one thing. So let's try something in another language so you can see what I'm talking about. So I want you to identify at least one word from the following sentence. So I'm going to tell you something in another language, and then let's see if you can tell how many words are in this sentence. Ready? Elmayı verebilir misin lütfen? Okay, I'm repeating it. Elmayı verebilir misin lütfen? As you can see, it's not that easy, right? It's maybe you can take one word, maybe not, but it's not easy. But now I'm going to show you what I said. Okay, this is what I said. Elmayı verebilir misin lütfen? So as you can see, it's not that easy. And this is, by the way, Turkish. It means, would you please give me the apple? So how do children do it then? Of course, children are innately capable of acquiring language, but it doesn't mean that their brain does nothing. It doesn't mean that. So they use strategies. I don't think they do it intentionally, but how their brain processes. One of the strategies the babies and children do is syllable stress. That means every language has its own pattern of where the stress is placed in a word, or at least if there is some sort of rules or patterns of the stress. Like in English language, most of the time the syllable stress is placed in the first syllable. So in other language it might be a different part. So if you see one part of the word or the speech stream, you hear that there's a stress here and then there is no stress, and then the next stress is here. That means between this stress and this stress area there is a word, so you can tell that. But the problem is that this is true in English language about 90% of the time. The first part of the syllable is stressed. So what happens for the 10%? Imagine that you don't understand 10% of the conversation. It may sound little, but it's really not. That will be a big communication barrier, especially, let's say, the most important part of the conversation, if it falls under that 10%. So what happens if a strategy doesn't work perfectly? You don't throw it away, right? You use it until it works, and then you can also use another strategy at the same time to eliminate the deficiency of one strategy. So the second strategy is the transitional probabilities. It's the probability of the co-occurrences of sounds. That means there are some sounds, the possibility of certain sounds getting together is way higher than some other random sounds getting together. That's basically what it means. For instance, in English language, pre and T sound getting together is way higher than any other word combination that comes after pretty, like pretty baby, pretty car, pretty, etc. Like pretty baby, pretty car, pretty girl, pretty song, pretty sky. So when you look at the screen, you see the pre and T, I just number them like 1 and 2. And the next sound, I number them with a different number. As you see, like between 1 and 2 getting together is the possibility of 1 and 2 sound 1 and 2 getting together is way higher than possibility of the sound 2 and 3, or even 2 or 4, or 2 or 5, 2 or 6, 2 or 7. So if two sounds pretty much get together most of the time, or enough time, that, and then you get a feeling like, oh, that must be a new word. So let's try it in another language. Now listen to me and see if you can tell any words apart. Güzel araba, güzel kız, güzel ev, güzel bahçe, güzel söz, güzel huy. Can you tell at least one word? You should be able to say, yes, güzel, you know, that was repeated a lot. But it's not just one syllable, it has two parts. So gü and zel. Gü sound and zel sound coming together, the possibility of these sounds coming together was way higher than any other combination of the words that you heard. And that's why you were able to detect at least one word. So whatever comes after güzel should be another word. Okay, so do children do more than copying adult speech, or that's all they do? If you know anything about me, that I will say they do way more than copying adults. Actually, they don't copy adult speech much. So let's do an experiment, huh? Again, let's go with Turkish. This time you'll be counting in Turkish. So and on the screen you will see how you can write certain Turkish numbers. 1 to 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 to 14, 11, 12, 13, 14, and then 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and then hundreds, 100, 200, 300, and just 100, 200, 300, 400, and then thousands, 1000, 1000, 2000, 2000, 3000, 3000. Now, simply looking at this screen, and without getting any help from anybody else, or Google, or any other search engine, let's see if you can write how you will say 76 in Turkish, or 567, 1489. Let's see, you can write down this number. So pause the video and then work on it, just simply looking at the screen, nothing else, to see if you can come up with these numbers. And then we'll continue from there. Okay. Now, did you come up with the following answers that you see on the screen? 15, 76, 570, 567, sorry, 1489, 198,643. And if you did come up with these or some of these, how did you do it? Because if you look at the original number sheet that I provided, these numbers weren't there, right? Like 76, there was no 76 there. There was 70 and there was 6, but there was no 76. And so how did you come up with these answers? And why am I even giving a Turkish numeric system when I should be talking about language? What's the deal here? As you can see, even though I didn't provide you every single number in Turkish, you were able to come up with something that was not taught to you. So you understood somewhat how Turkish numeric system was working. So based on that understanding, you were able to come up with new numbers that you have never heard before or no one taught you before. This is exactly how language works. You understand the system, and this understanding is lack of a better word, it is enabled by an innate mechanism that enables you to understand the language, and based on that understanding you can come up with sentences that you have never ever heard in your entire life. So that's very similar to this scenario. So as you saw it, without copying, you came up with some new stuff, new numbers. Now let's look at in English to see if children simply copy adults. Let's go with English grammar rules. So statement: a unicorn is in the garden. Fine. Question: how do you turn this statement into a question? You put the is, the beginning of the sentence. Is a unicorn in the garden? Right? That will be a question. So that's the rule. So the rule is to take the is and put it at the beginning of the sentence, and that makes it a question. Okay, let's just try this rule again. Now the statement, I'm going to give you a statement. A unicorn that is eating a flower is in the garden. Let's apply the rule that we did above, a little bit before. So just put the is at the beginning. Is a unicorn that eating a flower is in the garden? It doesn't sound right. It doesn't, because by simply copying the rule, you come up with a sentence that makes absolutely no sense. So if children were simply copying adults and then trying to get the grammar rules and just copy it to other examples when they are using another sentence, then they will come up with all sorts of mistakes, but they don't. Children do make mistakes, but not this much. If they were to just simply copy the rules, they would have made way more mistakes. So what did we learn from these activities? That learning language involves an understanding of a system, not simply copying or imitating. It's understanding a system, which is enabled by an innate mechanism that we get it by birth. So because of this understanding the system, we can produce new things that we have not taught before. This means children, and also adults, do not simply copy and imitate what they are taught. They go way beyond that. It doesn't mean that language acquisition involves no copying. There must be some copying, but the level of it is really very minimal. And we go beyond imitation and attempt to understand the internal structure of the language system. And once the internal structure of the language system is acquired, then we can express ourselves in an infinite manner. Now let's take a look at the word climb. So think about what climb means. What comes to your mind if I say define the word climb? You probably say motion that's understood as upward, going from down to up. So let's look at the examples to see if it is easy to define what climb is. Adem climbed the ladder. So the motion in this example is understood as upward. Adem climbed down the ladder. Now it's not going up, it's actually going down. So most people don't even think about the word climb having the meaning of going down, right? Adem climbed the mountain up a narrow path. Now this is a very strange definition, because now you're talking about it's not straight up, it's kind of around it, you know, and there is really it's like a path around the mountain and you go around it. It's not like taking a ladder or climbing a tree. Now another example, Adem climbed a rope. Now climbing a rope is different than climbing onto a tree trunk, right? It's a different action. Adem climbed the fence. Now this is another strange definition. You not only go from down to up, and then you go over. Because when you say Adem climbed the fence, you're not saying Adem, the boy, is just standing on the fence. No, he went over, right? So it's not, the motion is not just understood as upward and as upward alone. It's upward and over. Another example, the temperature climbed to 109 degrees. That's not even a physical action. The airplane climbed the cloud. Now in the other example, or many other examples, you see that when you climbed, the thing that you are climbing on provides some sort of support for your action. In this example, the cloud doesn't do that, but it's still considered as the word climb. It falls under the word climb. And last one, even though this is not the last example, but this is my last example, is Adem climbed out of the hole. So as you see, this is not it's not an on, the action that takes place on something like on a ladder. It's an action that takes place within. And I got these examples from this article that's shown on the screen, and it will be on the reference list if you want to take a look at it. As you see, the simple word climb has so many different definitions that the question is, how do especially young children know a concept like this, a word like this, when they are exposed to it only a very limited number of times? How is it possible? In determining, even adults, to what falls in and out of a concept, a word, it's not an easy task. And it's not easy to define words. It's perhaps even, it might be even impossible in some cases. And especially if you're not talking about some very technical words, like some chemical substance, whatever. all words have many, many, many meanings. So how do we even make sense of sentences of other people when every single word that comes out of their mouth has multiple, multiple meanings, right? And it's just an amazing act, because every single word has multiple meaning. And you hear one sentence, and in that sentence, let's say you hear 6 words, that each word has like 10 or more meanings. And can you calculate how many possibilities that can exist in that sentence? But we just get it just like this, which shows that if a young child is able to understand a very complex thing with a very minimum exposure, the plausible explanation will be that they must have an innate structure already in their mind. Like this, of course, word is a cognitive structure. They must have it by birth. And then what they are doing is simply just when they are exposed to the word, they just match what they have in their mind, mental concept, and then, oh, this is how it is sound, this is how it is pronounced in this language. It's like finding a lid to a pot. The pot, you already have it, and you're looking for a lid. And when you're exposed to a language, that's what happens. And this is a disclaimer that I am, as you can see, heavily influenced by Chomsky's philosophy and his books, and these examples, many of them come from his books, which I love reading. For instance, in one of his books, Chomsky, Language and Problem of Knowledge, a very beautiful book, absolutely a must-read book. It says, "It is as if the child, prior to any experience, has a long list of concepts like climb, and then the child is looking at the world to figure out which sound goes with the concept. We know that the child figures it out with only a very small number of representations of the sound. So you're exposed to it only very limited time, but you understand. When you see it, you know what it means. When you hear it, you know what it means. Which means you must have something by birth, because the input that you are having, environmental input, it's way too limited. That's why it's called poverty of stimulus or poverty of input, because it's actually a problem since Plato, perhaps even before. It's puzzling people's mind, like how can we know this much when our experiences are so limited? Our life is not hundreds and hundreds of years, and our personal experiences are very limited, but we know so much about the world. And in this case, we know so much about language, but our experiences are so limited with language. We don't even talk non-constant. We don't even be exposed to language all day long. But like most of the language, actually, it takes place within our head. It's like when we talk to ourselves. Hopefully I will address this in another video. Now, in the process of identifying a word, context matter. That means the way you are exposed to this pronunciation of certain sounds may result in different registration of that sound. This is not maybe true for every single sound, but for certain ones who are like ambiguous, the sound may be very similar to another sound, then the context matters a lot. Now I want you to listen to this video, and I will provide a link for this. This is from originally from Dr. Patricia Kuhl's video, and I will provide the link at the end, at the reference page, and you can go watch the whole thing from beginning to end, which I think you should. It's a very, very informative video. So listen to the video and follow the instruction. Patricia Kuhl will be asking you to close your eyes and open your eyes, and then another lady will be saying a word, and then see if you can hear something different when your eyes are open versus closed.
Okay, close your eyes. Go. Baba, 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 Baba. Okay, open up. Baba, Baba, Baba. Open and close. Baba. See if you can make it go away. Baba, 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 Baba.
Isn't that amazing? That when you close your eyes, you should hear something like Baba, like the B or something like that. And when your eyes are open, you don't hear the B sound because you see that her lips are not really touching, so your brain registers that sound differently. But when your eyes are closed, it sounds like it's a B sound, something like that. And so which means that context matter, like the way you're exposed to certain sounds will have a different implication. You will register those sounds very differently. Again, this may not be true for every single sound, but for certain ones this is the fact. So which also means that we are wired to be communicating with people face to face, looking at their face, and that's the most natural way of acquiring language, with human interactions. Imagine that someone is talking and we're not even paying attention to their facial expressions or anything like that. And that's not the ideal form of communication. Now I want to look at, finally, this images that you see on the two images are on the left side and two on the right side. And do you see any similarity between the pictures on the left versus pictures on the right? And by the way, the person on the screen on the bottom right and the person who is crossing his legs is Noam Chomsky. So what's the similarity here? We see birds flying, spider is doing web, and children are talking and adults are talking. They are doing what they are designed to be doing. We are designed to acquire language, and therefore we don't need to be lectured about language. It's just going to happen. You can actually, if you're exposed to a language, like imagine a child. If the child is exposed to a language, you can't even prevent that child to learn that language, to acquire that language. It's really not possible. As long as that child hears language to a certain level, registers that language to a certain level, he or she is going to learn that language. You can't help it. It's very much like walking, like a physical ability. You just, you see a child around age of 1, and then they just suddenly start saying words, and then around 2 they start talking, and it just happens so naturally that it gives you the feeling that this is just like walking. No one taught you how to walk, and no one really is teaching you how to speak either. And it may sound crazy, but it really is not. If you pay attention to nature, we are part of the natural world. if you look at the seed, when you plant it in a pot and you pour water on it, and the seed will most likely grow and become whatever it's designed to become. Let's say it's a orange seed, so it becomes an orange tree. But just because you water the seed, it doesn't mean that you taught that seed to have to become a orange tree. Sometimes adults take way too much credit and like, I'm teaching my child how to speak. Actually, you're not. Like, sometimes my students ask, are you teaching your children Turkish? I said, no, I don't teach my children Turkish. They say, why? It's such a waste. You know, 2 languages. Why don't you teach your own language? Why are you turning your back to your culture, etc.? I said, who said they don't speak Turkish or they don't understand Turkish? I just said, I'm not teaching them. I just speak to them. I'm just providing the water for them, and their brain does the work. I don't need to explicitly teach them anything. If I talk to them, and if they have enough experiences with Turkish, they will at least understand it. The speaking is a different matter because they have to see the relevance and the usefulness of it to actually intentionally speak it. But understanding, they don't have a choice. They will, and they do understand Turkish. And another biological example that I wanted to talk to you about, because these are really powerful examples in my opinion. In the picture you're seeing like birds are flying. You don't see any mama bird teaching the baby bird how to fly. Okay, bird, now put your wing this way, the other one this one, now jump and start. You don't see that because it doesn't exist. That's why you don't see it. Why? Because when it is time for that bird to fly, it will fly. It's a maturational issue, but it's not just a time issue, it's also the biological issue. Actually, our language is biologically determined, meaning that it's gonna happen. Under normal circumstances, it's gonna happen. You can't help it. Just like walking, it's gonna happen. You can't help it. And it's like reaching puberty. If you live long enough, you will reach puberty. It's determined by your biology, but it doesn't mean that environmental factors play no role. No, it does play a role, but not as much as most people will think. That is the time of the puberty may change slightly, or depending on the cultural or environmental factors, but you are going to reach puberty if you live long enough. Just like you're going to speak the language if you're exposed to it. That's the bottom line. And there are so many interesting facts about this issue. Creoles and pigeons, that they're like deep structure, surface structure. There are so many concepts that I would like to address it to make my argument stronger, but that will be a very long video, so I will, in another video, hopefully I will address those terminology. Thank you for watching, and please, if you have any questions, just type your questions at the YouTube right below, I guess, and I will try to answer those questions. You can email me, or just type your question on the YouTube comment box. Thank you, and have a nice day.